With dawn on the 13th of May, 1944, USS SLATER DE-766 was continuing her convoy training off Bermuda. Fellow destroyer escorts USS McCoy-Reynolds DE-440 and USS Walter C. Wann DE-412 joined her. This morning, SLATER was in station number 3 with a speed of 12 knots. The convoy speed of 10 knots allows for selected screening ships to fan out miles in a certain direction and search for submarines. Convoys were most susceptible to attack from the front because a submarine could sit and wait as the ships came closer. The soundman and sonar would never hear the submarine as it sat still. This is why we see convoy screening ships positioned at the front and sides of a convoy. A submerged submarine is a very slow boat. If a sub is only able to attack from behind while submerged, her skipper has a limited amount of time to fire her torpedoes before the faster surface ships outranged her. At night, the ships of the convoy would come in closer, allowing for the screening ships to keep more easily everyone together. With a position of 31 degrees, 39 minutes north, 64 degrees, 10 minutes west, course was changed to 354 degrees PGC, or per gyro compass, 350 degrees true. Exercise George 2 and George 5 commenced shortly before 0900. George 2 was a mail delivery exercise. Wann transferred mail to SLATER, and once completed, SLATER transferred mail to Wann. George 5 began at 10:03, and Wann began towing SLATER. And just like the mail delivery, roles were reversed and SLATER took Wann under tow. All of this was completed at 11:41. George 3 was next. This was a firing over the bow exercise. Wann fired a few rounds over SLATER's bow, and her crew was ordered to stop all engines. A search party from Wann boarded the ship, led by Lieutenant William Rogers. After a successful search, they must not have found the still in B2. Lieutenant Rogers and his party disembarked SLATER and returned to Wann. Both ships resumed sailing and made for the rendezvous area. During this travel period, 2 emergency steering drills were completed. After rejoining with McCoy-Reynolds, the 3 ships set course for Bermuda. SLATER acted as the guide ship. As they approached their anchorage, exercise Sugar 11 began, but it was not completed in time. I'm not sure exactly what this exercise involved, but it was most likely related to coming into a port. SLATER moored to buoy F3 at 18:59, and repair boat number 2 came alongside to starboard to transfer a torpedo from SLATER. Reynolds moored to SLATER's starboard side, and Carter to her port side. The deck log states USS Carter moored to SLATER, but the hull number of Wann is given. Carter's hull number was 112. This is most likely a clerical error, and it should read USS Carter DE-112 moored alongside to ports. On the 14th, the deck log gives another discrepancy. It says SLATER is moored to buoy E3, whereas the previous night's entry says F3. Carter left at 0740, and repairs began on the general alarm system at 0840. Another torpedo was transferred off the ship, this time to USS Hamel AD-20. A new torpedo was returned to the ship. An oil barge came along starboard and began refueling SLATER. A draft of 9 feet 10 inches was recorded forward and 10 feet 10 inches aft. The Liberty Party left the ship at 12:10, and refueling was completed at 13:20. 50,830 gallons of fuel were taken aboard. That's over 300,000 pounds. A new draft of 10 feet 6 inches forward and 11 feet 3 inches aft was recorded. A.G. Hall, Seaman First Class, was transferred to the disciplinary barracks under guard of D.G. Bridge, Boatswain's Mate Second Class. If we remember, on the 9th of June, he struck S.L. Lauder, Seaman Second Class, in the face, resulting in injury. On the 12th, Hall was given a bad conduct discharge. A boarding and salvage party from Carter came aboard as a drill, and later that evening, Bridge and the Liberty Party returned. The next morning, Slater and her fellow DEs left their mooring buoy and left Bermuda. The general alarm that had been repaired the prior day was found to be inoperative. As repairs were being worked on, Slater began a dry firing run while escorting a tug. She followed the same movements as Reynolds, and Leroy Mitchell, chief boatswain's mate, was added to the sick list this morning. In the afternoon, Oboe 2, a short-range firing exercise, was conducted, and 15 rounds of SPDN 3376 3-50 caliber rounds were expended. Oboe 3, a day battle practice, followed, and 27 SPDN 3376 rounds and 3 SPDN 3613 were expended. SPDN is the type of powder that was used. SPD stands for smokeless powder with diphenylamine as a stabilizer, adopted by the US Navy in 1908. The N stands for non-hygroscopic, which means the powder doesn't absorb and retain moisture. Oboe 7 commenced at 1823. This was an anti-aircraft drill. 2 rounds of anti-aircraft common rounds of 3-50 caliber, 20 rounds of 40mm HET, high explosive tracer, SPDEN 4086, 183 rounds, 20mm HEI, high explosive incendiary, 19 rounds, 20mm BLMP, blind loaded and plugged. This is a shell containing no explosives, or one having its fuse disabled, so that shouldn't explode. And finally, 68 rounds of 20mm HET. After the firing exercise, Slater joined the convoy in column number 2, astern of Reynolds, for night firing. Oboe 4 began at 20:58 when general quarters was sounded. Oboe 5 began immediately after. 30 rounds of 3-50 caliber AA common, 30 rounds of 3-50 caliber star shells were expended. Slater and Reynolds were still steaming on the morning of the 16th. E-21 dropped a pyramid target at 0940. Oboe 6 and Oboe 15 were scheduled to begin a minute later, but they were pushed back until the afternoon when visibility increased. By the end, 36 rounds of 40mm HET, 15 rounds 3-50 caliber AA, 195 rounds 20mm HEI, 98 rounds 20mm HET, 12 rounds BL and P 20mm were expended. After securing from general quarters, Slater sailed independently to rejoin Reynolds for convoy escorting practice. Zigzag plan number 9 commenced at 20:15. This was completed within an hour, and as you can see by the chart, this pattern is designed for 2 hours. On the 17th, Slater continued her convoy practice with Reynolds. She was the second ship within the column. Reynolds was acting as the guide ship, 1,000 yards in front. At 0750, Slater continued to experience electrical problems with her alarm system. Not only was it discovered that the general alarm was inoperative, but the chemical attack alarm wasn't working either. She was ordered to sail independently at 0753. After morning muster, a fire drill was commenced with the fire in the galley. First streams of water will put on the fire within 2 minutes of the alarm. A collision drill at 0909, and the collision was on port side between frames 52 and 53. This is in the mess deck between a closet and the scullery. The hole was plugged and pumps were started. If you recall, at the end of last week's video, I mentioned how Slater took on water in a collision. This is what was meant. The water and collision were merely a drill. A steering casualty drill began immediately after the fire, and collision drills had concluded. A boarding and salvage party departed the ship via the motor whaleboat at 0952, and they practiced firing small arms. 88 rounds of 45 caliber ball and 40 rounds of 30 caliber ball were expended. Once everyone was secured from busy morning of drills, Slater reformed with Reynolds and their pretend convoy. More firing exercises with Reynolds later that day. 51 3-inch 50 caliber AA rounds, 112 rounds of 40mm, 586 rounds 20mm HET, 236 rounds 20mm HET. One of these 20mm was probably HEI or HET, but was most likely recorded incorrectly. And finally, 58 rounds BL and P were expended on this date. The convoy exercise concluded at 1601, and Slater sailed independently for buoy E3 in Great Sound Bay, Bermuda. Reynolds moored starboard side and Carter to port. At 2140, R.J. Davis, gunner's mate 3rd class, was relieved from gangway watch and placed on the medical list with acute gastroenteritis. Slater got underway the following morning and formed up as escort for a tug that was to act as both the convoy as well as the tanker. After performing various courses and speeds pursuant to escorting, Slater was relieved by Carter and took up astern of the tug for exercise George 4, a fueling exercise. This finished at 1316, and Slater returned to Bermuda and moored portside to Reynolds with 6 lines. The 19th of June, and we see Slater and her crew getting underway once more. After the morning checks were completed, she conducted a simulated submarine attack. Full set of 10 depth charges were expended. After this was completed, George 8 began, and Slater laid down a 5-minute smokescreen. The museum no longer has Slater's smokescreen generator, but you can see it in this photograph. After providing the smokescreen, Slater switched positions to become the ship being escorted, and a smokescreen was laid to hide her. George 3 followed, and Slater's crew fired 2 rounds of AA common from gun number 32 across the bow of a suspicious vessel. At 1432, the motor whaleboat was lowered with a boarding party. They were in the water and away within 4 minutes. They returned at 1507, and Slater began sailing independently once more. A defective fuse was discovered on 1 round of 3-inch 50 caliber AA, and it was tossed overboard. Slater took position astern of Reynolds that night, before taking position number 1 to screen Reynolds, who was acting as the convoy. Since this was now a nighttime convoy, Slater would have been directly in front of Reynolds at only a few hundred yards. And there we have another week in the books. If you recall, a few weeks ago, I hinted at Slater's involvement with the captured German U-boat U-505, which is now a museum in Chicago. Well, we finally get to learn about that next week, so stay tuned.